Hello, my name is Solia Yamaya Quinn, and today I will be discussing spiritual appropriation through the lens of my own life. To begin this podcast, I'd like to define a couple of terms, the first of which being appropriation. Appropriation is, according to the dictionary, quote, the action of taking something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission. In the lens of cultural appropriation, spiritual appropriation would then be somebody or a group of people that are of the dominant group, taking a religion or spiritual practice from a minority group without permission to do so. The second term I would like to define is cultural appreciation. Cultural appreciation is the act of learning with permission from another race or culture about their practices or beliefs. However, not using those practices or beliefs for your own personal gain or use. Cultural appreciation never profits from this cultural exchange. Personally, I have both appreciated and appropriated culture. As a white woman growing up with no specific religious affinity, my parents encouraged me and taught me about many different world religions. Leaving it at the teaching and exploration would be, simply, cultural appreciation. However, I also participated in cultural appropriation. When we would use dream catchers, sage, and bindis, among other things, for fun experiences, I had the privilege of trying on minority culture's religious and spiritual items or beliefs. I had the privilege of being able to take that dream catcher down, the privilege of having my henna wash away and my bindi taken off. Because at the end of the day, I did not have to deal with the detrimental effects of our institutionally racist system. My exploitation, even though my intent was pure, was still at its core exploitation. I did not and will not ever have to truly confront what it is to live as a person of color in this country. Because of the actions of my race, many minority Americans have been murdered, discriminated against, or deported because of their culture. That same culture which people of my race and I have worn to festivals, parties, tried on, thought was fun or sweet diversion, paying into this racist system. Because I've never had to live as a person of color in America, it was very, very easy, and still is, for me to not have emotional connection to these spiritual ties. It's easy for me and many others of my race to dismiss the issues that surround spiritual appropriation. What makes us, white people, so eager to be a part of or take and keep for ourselves Native and minority spiritual practices? What are we missing in our own society? And why is it exotic, fashionable, and cool when we do it, but savage, primitive, and heathen when the actual members of that culture practice their religious beliefs? This podcast, I'll be centering the conversation around my personal experience with spiritual appropriation and appreciation. So, let's start at the beginning. Both my parents were raised Catholic, and both my parents took a deep diversion from the Catholic Church after they left for adulthood. My mother and my father both discovered yoga at some point in the 80s and 90s. They separately practiced, taught, and learned. They actually met each other after taking a class together. This was at a time when yoga was just being introduced to the Western world, a time very different than where we are now, with the core power and Yoga 6 on every corner, hot yoga in every single gym. So here's an interview clip with my father, who is a co-owner of a studio called Yoga View. So I wanted to ask you about your view on corporate yoga and our studio, Yoga View, in the lens of cultural appropriation versus cultural appreciation?
Yeah, so my partner and I opened up YogaView 17 years ago, and before that we had studied for 10 plus years, both in India and America, with teachers who really respected the traditions of the practice of yoga, in particular the specific practice of yoga asana, which is the stretches, and the breathing practices, pranayama. So after many years of studying and then starting to teach, we decided we wanted to create a space where we could basically provide that healing and what we call the spiritually uplifting modality of yoga to the people of the Chicago area. And that's how we started. And so it's a big question you're asking, how does something get taken from, where my partner and I had studied for years, both in India and here, and slowly started to teach and do that, versus taking some aspect of that practice that works and, corporatizing it and just, taking out the depth of it, if you will, and then mass producing it in the American population.
A theory on the reason for this appropriation is quoted in an essay written by Jackie Krogmeyer of Purdue University. Quote, "Consumption of native culture may be so popular today because of a sense of disconnect from one's own culture. Many Americans feel as though they have no cultural identity of their own." End quote. This need to use and take from an oppressed community is, in my experience, because of an absence of connection. The unfulfilled place in the human experience that Christianity has not been able to fill. The connection to nature and for a more personal spirituality, for female empowerment, seem not to have been found in the Catholic and Christian churches. Because we have the power to exploit and appropriate a minority's religion, based on which parts are attractive to us, we do just that. Despite the fact that we whites have outlawed and imposed the very practices we now wear to music festivals, on runways, to parties, post on Instagram, think of as trends. I've admired the beauty, worn the garb, experienced some ceremonies, but I've not been killed because of my faith. I've not been denied clean water or education, or mocked because of my religion. A detour I hear a lot, and that I myself have used, is, well, if we want to progress as a civilization, then cultures must be shared. We can't just all stick to our own culture and never experience anything new. Exploration is healthy and good for the society, for the world as a whole. However, the only thing that this detour says is that we should be appreciating other cultures, not exploiting and appropriating them. This detour actually defends cultural appreciation and disproves cultural appropriation. After realizing the truth about the appropriation that I've done, I became extremely conflicted. How do I undo the wrongs that my people have created, the wrongs that I've created? Can I even turn appropriation into appreciation? I found myself falling into the exhaustion detour, thinking that there's too much to do and why even try at all? But that lasted very shortly because I realized that that's a really stupid detour to make. White Americans are still searching for religious and spiritual significance in their own lives. However, we do not need to take the sacred practices of groups of people that have suffered under our hands for hundreds of years. In recent years, there's been a major resurgence and revival of Northern European pagan beliefs and traditions, the religions of pre-Catholic and pre-Christian Northern Europe. I've found that my spiritual journey can still have significance and importance without having to appropriate other spiritual experiences. My ancestors were Irish, and I'm 65% Irish. Northern European pagan beliefs are strikingly similar to every other human group's pre-Christ beliefs and practices. Now, This may be extremely shocking, but humans are similar creatures to other humans. Weird, right? Because humans think the same, each culture and religion and region has practices that mirror one another. Coming-of-age ceremonies, practices to celebrate the dead, ceremonies for the newly born. You name it, most cultures have it. It doesn't take much but a little looking to find the fulfillment in your own culture's history without having to take from another. After talking to a few different people on this topic of spiritual appropriation, I've heard some interesting viewpoints. A common comment is, well, why do these cultures have to be so stingy? Why can't these minority cultures just share? Let us use their cultural beliefs. Why can't we all just be one big happy family? My response to that is, well, we kind of ruined it with the whole colonizing them and slaughtering their children and doing horrible, horrible things for hundreds of years. Those cultures have the right to preserve their spiritual practices and the right to deny our use of them. It's hypocritical to think that we would expect anything else. These cultures have shared enough already. They've, quote, shared their land when we took it from them. They've shared their resources when we stole it from underneath them. Their money, their oil, food, children, you name it, and I can almost guarantee that we white people have found a way to exploit that resource. It would be great to live in a world where we don't have to worry about things like history or past genocides that have been committed. But unfortunately, we don't live in that utopian world yet. And keeping that in mind, it is important to be conscious about our choices, especially as white people. I don't care about the hard work anymore. I don't care that it may be inconvenient for me to research my own culture's beliefs over simply buying a Bruja kit at Urban Outfitters or the sage off of Amazon that's being illegally harvested. It's high time that I grit my teeth and actually put in some work to dismantle this system. So, nowadays, instead of attending a sweat lodge run by a white man, I opt for a Scandinavian sauna. Instead of burning white sage, I burn lavender or bay leaf. I try to ensure that my parents' business is appreciating rather than appropriating culture. The line between appreciating and appropriating can be difficult at times to discern. But I believe that by being proactive, healthily self-critical, and open to being wrong, I can move forward into appreciating all the cultures and spiritual practices in the world, without having to take or alter for my own gain those practices.